people somewhat expects us to be everywhere, right? My name is Lawson Hardrick III, and I'm personally really extremely passionate about the idea of universal broadband access, even when, and even putting such measures on the ballot, because there has never been a much more propitious time to discuss this, as we find ourselves in the midst of this pandemic where remote work has been our only option. More specifically, I'm from Imperial County, a county that is known for usually having some of the highest unemployment rates and poverty rates out of all of California's counties. And it was through my advocacy for equitable student services across my satellite campus in Imperial County from SDSU that I became acutely and maybe too acutely aware of the digital divide here, especially when I had those conversations with some friends on campus who were living in unincorporated areas of Imperial County. But they attended my campus here in Imperial County because it's the only public four-year institution we have in the entire county. I also feel like we have a really good opportunity here to make universal broadband access more expanded, and how to do so with so many different types of ideas currently being spoken of, such as, specifically like tax credits, the ISPs, infrastructure development zones, and better yet, all of you incredible people and great minds are here with us today to discuss what can ultimately help move California forward. Pun not intended, but I saw an opportunity to mention California forward. And ultimately, if it wasn't for them, probably Michael and I wouldn't be here today. So I will go ahead and just pass it along to Michael.
Thanks, Lawson. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this discussion around an increasingly important topic, which is broadband connectivity. My name is Michael Wiafe. I was born abroad and grew up in the Inland Empire in Southern California. Currently, I'm a graduate student instructor and Master's of Public Policy student at UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy, and almost a year ago graduated from San Diego State. I served as a student leader throughout my time in undergrad and an advocate for higher education, most recently as 2019-2020 president of the Cal State Student Association, which I was in the role on the initial impact of the pandemic. When it initially hit, one of the first issues to be raised probably in the first or second day was the lack of broadband at home for so many students. As many things with COVID, the digital divide has always been there, but the inequities were exacerbated. Students, staff, and faculty, those with challenging home situations, were wiped off the digital campus map within a matter of days. And there was a tough scramble to figure out how to get people connected within their homes to continue their education. And as we know from the data in CETF's recent report in collaboration with USC, this is a socioeconomic racialized divide in California. As a distance learning student for the past year, there's been countless times where students, including myself, are unable to contribute to the discussion, maybe disconnect in the middle of speaking, or do not have consistent access to course materials, among many others. As we know, last summer and fall was record high wildfire season and strong high winds across many parts of the state, knocking over connectivity and sometimes power lines. 2 days before a large essay was due, our Wi-Fi went out in my neighborhood due to the wind, and I had to try to do research from my phone while tapping on my laptop. It was an entire mess. Something I hope to never try to get done again. And as an instructor now, I've had students disconnect and reconnect from class every 5 minutes. I've had some email me from their phones to tell me that their connectivity is out and they have no idea when it'll come back. At one point, I had to navigate a situation where a student had no access to course materials to class for over 2 weeks, let alone folks who need to apply for jobs, government services, vaccine distribution, you name it. Although my involvement in trying to address this issue is fairly recent, I will also add that for many of us young people, we have few memories of life before the internet. It's almost as crucial to many households today as other public utilities. I will say that my family didn't have much growing up, but one thing we did have was a small backup generator for the Wi-Fi alone in our household. And I'm sure we all know how important this issue is. You don't need to hear from me much longer. And as Lawson mentioned, we're both part of California Forward's Young Leaders Advisory Council, a statewide group of young people from diverse backgrounds striving to build equitable economies. With us today, we're grateful to have great speakers here to share their insights. We're lucky to be joined by Assemblymember Mike Gipson, representing the 64th Assembly District, and Tim Grayson, Assemblymember, representing the 14th District. We're also joined by staff members George Soares from Senator Lena Gonzalez's office and Abraham Mendoza from Assemblymember Gipson's office. Lastly, we want to recognize Susan Walters, Senior Vice President at the California Emerging Technology Fund, who is also joining us today. Thank you all for joining us. Assemblymember Gipson, would you mind starting?
Oh, sorry.
Thing.
It's going to give
yeah. So I'm actually. Go ahead, Connor. I don't know if you want me to kick in. So myself, the Assembly member is actually running a little bit tardy, so I will be presenting on his behalf for AB 1425, and he'll be joining us for the conversation a bit later. Okay. Great. Excellent. Susan, do you want to kick it off, or do you want me to begin?
Yeah, why don't I just open up with a couple comments to set the stage. Thanks, Abraham. Welcome, everybody. I'm just so pleased to be part of the discussion this morning. As you know, the California Emerging Technology Fund has done an annual study since 2008, and you can see on the screen the results for overall adoption. And we have just released, Michael referenced, the latest study for 2021. So the good news of our current situation is now everybody is acutely aware of the digital divide, right? But it's also the bad news. We have so much work to do to get to digital equity. But we don't want to let this crisis pass without taking a leap forward because of everybody's awareness. So there really is an amazing opportunity for us in this moment as a result of the crisis, because it's clear to people in ways they might not have thought of before, present company excluded, that the internet is absolutely critical to almost every aspect of our life, whether we're talking about education or just continuing learning, whether we're talking about healthcare, whether we're talking about, work. And it really spans the age groups. It's not particularly beneficial to one group or another. We see that with people trying to get vaccine appointments, right, as well. We've seen stories over the year such that Michael described with his own personal experience, right? People having to drive distances and sit in a parking lot, right, to get an internet connection. How equitable is that? So not very. We've learned a lot at the California Emerging Technology Fund while we have been in the field, since 2007. There are a lot of things that became abundantly clear to us. We have worked very hard to get affordable offers, for instance, in the marketplace. But what we learned is those offers didn't meet the need during this pandemic. And they still, in many cases, aren't meeting the need. And how do we move forward with that? So just to start us off, I'm going to review 3 slides that will quickly give some high-level current data about adoption throughout California. So we have a couple of terms I'd like to just define so everybody watching is also clear on what we're referring to. We do have an overall connected number, and it you can see it here as 91% for California, which sounds great, except that when you look at the other ways we measure adoption, so we talk about connected through a desktop, a laptop, or a tablet, and then we talk about under connected. And by that, we mean people who only have a smartphone, and that's how they may connect to the internet if they connect at all. So it's overall connected. then connected, and then underconnected. And so while 91% represents the smartphone only, as well as those who connect through various other devices, the gap, right? The smartphone only folks and the people who are not connected at all, that represents almost 10 million households in California because our population is so large. So while 91% looks great, 9.5 million households not connected is not such a great, or people is not such a great stat. So if we can go on. The one thing I will quickly say, and it's really clear with education, is the reason we distinguish smartphone only is because it is not the same access that you have if you're connecting through a laptop or a desktop. Students see it most acutely, but it's true whether you're pulling up your bank's website on a phone or through an app versus on a desktop or a laptop. And it can affect a telehealth visit in terms of what's possible and what's not possible, the depth of the appointment. So what you have in front of you now are the regions throughout California. Again, this survey has been done, since 2008. And so we have data over time for these regions. When we started, Los Angeles had the lowest adoption rate. And we look at LA as really ground zero for closing the digital divide in California and in the nation because of its population. And as many of you may realize, California has the distinction of having the most number of people who are considered low income than any other state in the nation. And Los Angeles County has the largest within California. So we have these regions because the digital divide is, looks different in different parts of the state. And while I won't go through each region, right now, you can see before you that really a lot of regions have made tremendous progress, including the Inland Empire, which both Lawson and Michael are from. So, and the crosshatch in the box right represents the smartphone only. All right, let's go on. So this chart represents specific populations, right, within California. And so what we know is, of course, rural California has less infrastructure. So therefore we'll have lower adoption. And there's a lot of work to be done to make sure we get infrastructure in rural areas where it doesn't exist. But what this survey shows is clearly there is a divide for urban and rural areas. And some people try and look at it as one or the other, but the data clearly shows there's a divide in both urban and rural areas. Different reasons, but nonetheless a divide. So with that, let's go on and begin our discussion.
Okay, Michael, I'm assuming that now I'd be kicking it off, correct?
Let's actually start with Assemblymember Grayson since he's here, and then you can go. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Reporting to you live from the State Capitol building in Sacramento, California. I've always wanted to say that. Actually, I'm not outside. I'm inside my office right now. So thank you very, very much for the invite. It's such an honor to be with you all. Huge shout out to Forward California and also to California Emerging Technology Fund for the great efforts, the wonderful work that you're doing, and for your voice and what you're doing today. as you all already know, it's already been mentioned, what a tremendously, incredibly difficult year it has been this past year, as far as the reality of distance learning, Zooming, and just being in front of the screen. COVID-19 has kind of taken on a 19 impact for me personally. So I've got to get outside and do some more exercise. But I understand, and I'm fully aware of the challenges that the state continues to face with the massive inequities in access to technology. And I think it was just brought out by Ms. Walters and the slides. And I really so much appreciate what the point that was brought out, that it isn't just rural, although that is a huge issue that must be addressed in California, especially in the Central Valley, but it is in the urban areas, and it's in our communities, whether it's the underserved or the brown or the Black communities, and those that are in need of it the absolute most are the ones that struggle for access. And so having seen that, having actually witnessed it, and both from a local government perspective, as well as now from a state perspective, I did author and am authoring a bill, AB 1166. And what it seeks to, it aims to do is to accelerate how quickly the state can set up infrastructure facilities to be able to provide that critical needed internet access to communities that are most in need. So sometimes these facilities, and I can also say this, still with an active general contractor's license, having stood on both sides of that planning counter, there are times when infrastructure that would directly impact internet access, just for instance, a cell tower, maybe not addressing broadband here, but just an example, a cell tower taking over 2 years to just pull the permit. And so what this bill would do was it would accelerate the process and streamline the process for infrastructure for broadband wireless across the board. The Speaker of the California State Assembly has also convened a working group. So I am very proud to be a part of that working group to address solutions and address the digital divide that we have. Young leaders such as yourselves advocating for your success is to truly be commended, and you are that voice, and grow that voice, strengthen that voice, make that voice louder, and make it so that a narrative is going to be formed. Just make sure you're the author of your narrative. And with that, I hand it back to you, and thank you once again for having the opportunity to join you on such an impacting and transformational issue like broadband.
Thank you, Assemblymember Grayson, and thank you for your words. We'll continue to do just that. Abraham, would you mind going again to step in for Assemblymember Gipson?
Certainly. And so once again, apologies, folks, with the Assemblymember. As Mr. Grayson can attest, it's been a very interesting time for so many members, and especially us as staff right now, with committee hearings happening left and right and all these different things. So we're being pulled in a bunch of different directions. I will do my best to fill in for the member. Granted, I am definitely not him. And I'll just try and make sure to hit all the points that he would be addressing should he be here. First things first, I think it's important to talk about the Assemblymember's district, and it explains a lot of his motivations. So Assemblymember Gipson represents the South Los Angeles area, Compton, Watts, Torrance areas, Wilmington, Willowbrook, and parts of the LA Harbor and North Long Beach. This is a dramatically underserved community in so many different areas. It's the sixth poorest district in the nation, or in the state. And so with that being said, it stands to reason that there's a lot of different intersecting issues all at play, and I feel like for all of our young leaders that we have here on the call, it's important, that we all recognize that change starts in so many different areas. And one of the key things that the Assemblymember noticed, and that we noticed as well, is the need for broadband access. This was a very, very big issue, especially early on in the pandemic, when we started getting calls from a bunch of residents who were saying, hey, we can't access this. My school is trying to have us do remote learning, and my children don't have access to broadband. We don't even have a computing device to be able to get into this. But more specifically, something that we noticed, and this is the crux of our bill, AB 1425, is that we had residents in public housing units, so subsidized housing in legacy public housing units, that didn't have access to internet at all. You know, that it was super insufficient. And these were complexes, you know, that had previously been built using state funding. And we had low-income folks who were already at a disadvantage because of all these different intersecting identities and issues, but they didn't have access to internet. And this was something that was big for the Assembly member. He is born and raised in Watts. He's a member of the community, you know, so he knows and understands what it feels like, you know, to feel the pain of poverty and all these different identities. We had folks calling us saying, hey, I don't have broadband access, and now all of a sudden my appointments are all online. How am I going to be able to access, you know, telecommuting for work, my doctor's appointments, et cetera, all the things that Susan identified. And as young leaders, we know that, you know, access to the internet is essential for so many services. And because of the pandemic, we know that this is just going to continue. And so it's something that the state has to act in now to get ahead of what's happening. Just as Mr. Grayson said, you know, it's ridiculous that permitting takes so long to be able to promote this access. What we were looking at is, why is it that we have folks in subsidized units that the state is essentially already investing time and money and energy into making sure that we're advancing these people, but they don't even have internet connectivity? And so what our bill would be doing would be taking $25 million each year. Oh, the member's hopping on. Okay, so I'll just keep going until he's able to get connected. But what our bill would be doing is taking $25 million each year and putting it into the public housing account of the CASF fund. And so we are going to do that until every single resident in publicly subsidized housing, whether you are living in a rural area or an urban area, you will be in a situation where we are going to be channeling that funding in to ensure that there is access to internet for your tenants. And so that's what we are trying to do. That's what the member feels is a priority. We are trying to keep low-income folks connected to the internet and providing those services.
Thank you.
Mic drop. Bam. That was it.
Right. Do you want to add anything, Assemblymember Gipson?
No, no. Sorry for my tardiness. I was at the dentist and took a little longer than I anticipated. But no, I'm happy to be here. I think Abraham Mendoza, who works for my team, has summed up what this bill focuses on. We want to make sure that people in underserved, hard communities, especially in which I represent, which a lot of housing developments, and when they were built, you can't get internet, any kind of signal into those kinds of residents. And so we want to make sure that people are not disenfranchised and they have an opportunity to do what the rest of the world is doing. And that is, you know, having internet access. It was absolutely imperative that we get this bill across the desk, because it not only will benefit my district, but also other communities, even rural communities, are having difficult times getting access to internet. And so we want to make sure that broadband is made available to everyone. I have people who are tapping into someone's Wi-Fi and they're actually in the garage. I'm tapping into the neighbor's Wi-Fi next door or in the front house. You know, and so, and with this pandemic, you know, that may not be available. So trying to hook up with a Starbucks is now allowing you to be inside a Starbucks, and you can't stay there. It makes it very difficult. So we want to remove barriers, and we believe this is a way of removing some new barriers.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Gipson, for being able to join us. And we also do have staff member George Soares from Senator Lena Gonzalez's office, and I'd like to go ahead and pass the mic along to you if you have any remarks.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having us, and thank you to CETF for and California Forward for putting this on. This is you know, really great discussion. Apologies that Senator Gonzalez is not able to make it. You know, I'll just be really brief though in these remarks. You know, Senator Gonzalez is from Long Beach, and she also represents multiple cities along the in Southeast Los Angeles, right next to Assemblymember Gipson's district as well, and maybe even share a little bit of Long Beach. And, you know, so we experience a lot of the same issues with our constituents and residents in Senate District 33. Senator Gonzalez has been working on the digital divide and, you know, broadband connectivity since her time on the Long Beach City Council, and has continued to do that since she's gotten to the Senate. We were working on SB 1130 last year before the pandemic struck, and then it became, you know, all that more important. as the pandemic went along, we were not able to get that bill finished last year. So that's what's brought us to SB4 this year. And is what SB4 does is reforms the California Advanced Service Fund. And is what it does. It creates a long-term funding solution. Most recently took some amendments in the Senate Energy Committee to make it a bill that can generate up to $150 million a year through this program, and also has a 10-year sunset to really make sure that we can hit that number of unserved areas and to make sure each region is served correctly. In addition to that, it opens it up for local governments to be part of the solution, where providers are not able to kind of fill some of these gaps, whether it be in lower income urban areas or rural areas. Really empowers cities and counties and other entities at the local level to help build this infrastructure and really solve all of these different things, whether it be adoption, infrastructure, or affordability. But that's really what we're going at with SB4, and I look forward to the conversation today and answering any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, George, for joining us. And thank you, Susan, Assemblymember Grayson and Gipson, Abraham, for all the work that you do to close the digital divide. I could start this discussion by outing myself a little bit. I consider myself a zillennial, right at the end of millennials and the beginning of Gen Z. I grew up during the digital transition. My friends were on social media by the time I was in middle school. Internet access was important to educational success before high school. We learned how to type right after learning how to read, and essentially lived life with internet access with myself, for myself and those more privileged than me, who can hardly imagine life without it. Many of us had cell phones in elementary school and rely on access to internet for just about everything that we do. So for the Assembly members, Gipson and Grayson, how do you see your bills intersecting with issues that young leaders care about, like economic inequity, education, and so many others that are affecting us differently, but affecting us in current day?
Michael, I'm going to out myself as well. I have an AOL email address, and I lived before cell phones. So
that's two of us, Tim. That's two of us.
I feel so good right now. Go ahead, Gipson. You want to? I've got to get my mind back together after outing myself. So you want to answer that?
Well, first of all, I'm in the same way. I'm in the same boat. With respect to, we're probably 1 of 2 million who still have AOL. I've had it for such a long time, but I have Gmail as well, but my personal is my AOL account. But no, I think that with us, or with me, dealing with the broadband is tearing down barriers. It's also making a way for education to be really recognized or realized for people who are having this barrier placed in their road, not living in a place where they have no internet access, right? And so I think that this is part of our technology. Can you imagine? You said you wouldn't be able to imagine, Michael, in terms of living without internet. Well, we're in a pandemic and we had to stay at home. So just think about the people who had to stay at home, who had no internet access. They couldn't zoom in or zoom out. They had no real way of communicating with people because there was a mandate for you to stay home. And so therefore, we want to make sure that no one is disenfranchised by not being able to have what we believe this is part of our basic living, right? Most people can't live without a cell phone, right? Well, most people can't live without the internet access, the internet services as well. So again, it's about tearing down barriers, but it's also talking about dealing with this from an equitable lens. It's making sure that there's equitable distribution of resources, even in underserved and hard to reach communities. And I believe that's what we're attempting to do. That's what I believe that this legislature, this class right now of 2021 is moving towards that. Everyone come from different walks of life, different perspectives, but I think we're moving and trying to make people's lives better right where they are. Whether it's a grandmother who's raising her grandchildren and trying to understand the curriculum that, that's beyond her, but at least being able to have some internet access where they can go for the answers and the questions and try to making sure that they're not academically disenfranchised as well. So it's about really creating and writing a new narrative in this space we're living in, which is this pandemic, right? And we hope that, again, I don't think we will ever lose what we have right now in terms of the virtually reality coming in, zooming out. This is, I think, is going to be part of our trajectory and our lifestyle in terms of being able to communicate this way, be able to meet people. I can meet people in my house. I can meet people in my pajamas. You don't know I have pajamas on. You don't know what I have on, right? But I'm still able to have conversations. But I'm just saying, right? But the thing is, the technology is so advanced that we cannot afford to not allow people have access to the advancement of this technology.
Michael, I'll just take just a second, and he can drop the mic. He nailed it. My dear friend, Assemblymember Mike Gipson, who I highly regard and respect as a colleague of mine, either Michael or Lawson, forgive me, I can't remember which one, you made reference to access to internet or broadband in particular as almost becoming as essential as a utility. We would absolutely not find it acceptable to have a community that had no access to water or no access to electricity. The way our society has evolved, the way the economic environment has been nurtured in our state, I would go as far as to say at this very moment that broadband and internet access or the internet in itself has become an essential utility to the state of California. Our economy is being built on it. Our society is evolving and centralizing around it. So with that, access is not just a privilege anymore. Access is absolutely essential. And we've got to start looking at it just as we would any other utility, electricity, water, or other.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember
Good
Grayson.
point. Good
And
point.
Gipson, for those really great points. We definitely want to follow up with another question, but before we do, I just wanted to say I really like, Michael, how you highlighted that it's just embedded into our generations growing up, broadband, but it doesn't really receive that, presence, I guess, or like the acknowledgement, how important it is. It was just reminding me about how the other day, someone was making a joke how some of us from our generation, we suffer from phantom limb syndrome when we don't have our phones with us or something like that. So that really painted a really interesting picture for me, because it's true. When you don't have your phone, me personally, I don't feel complete, and I feel like something is just definitely missing, and I don't know what it is, but it's definitely the access, the internet, the being able to connect with people, just because that's just the way we're used to it. Our generation, it's honestly probably, I would say it's not that we're used to it entirely, but it's probably just the only way we do it. And so our next question is, since we can clearly see that the pandemic has laid bare this digital divide, how do your bills address closing the digital divide equitably? And I know that Assemblymember Grayson, you really did a great job of highlighting this. Assemblymember Gipson, do you have any thoughts behind this question?
How my bill, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. How do your bills address closing the digital divide equitably? Anything that you would like to highlight behind that?
I think Abraham summed it up when I was coming on. This closed digital divide is making sure that, that everyone have access. It's about being equitable when it comes down to, I think from my lens, our policies that we're putting forth in California, that's inclusive and not exclusive. And I think that this broadband approach, this legislation closes the digital divide in underserved communities. And I think that, again, I've heard from people, I've seen people in my district and have heard about other people's districts having a tough time. And we want to close that digital divide. And I believe that this is the time that we're going to do that. We are absolutely motivated. We know the governor's office is working with many of us on this. And we're going in the right direction. And we believe that it's going to take place in 2021.
And if I could just add in, it is so, Assemblymember Gipson's bill is so important because it is really focused on the poorest among us. And this is, we have in the lower income populations, there's 30% of this population that is not online. And so targeting, publicly subsidized housing is really an essential component of equity, because it's really getting to the folks who are not online today, right? So this includes, government housing, nonprofit, affordable housing, farm worker housing, right? All this housing that has been built with government funds. It's like, really, California has an opportunity to say, if we're going to spend money with you, you need to provide access, right? That's, just another approach that, the state could take. But Assemblymember Gipson's bill is fundamental to equity.
And we're talking about public housing, right? So if you think about public housing, where would you think the most underserved individuals are if they're not in public housing, right? And so they're in public housing because based on income or the lack thereof, they're in public housing. And if they're in public housing and they don't have access to the broadband relationship, then those are the people who we want to reach, because everybody else theoretically has it or don't. They have it or have access to it, or they don't want to use it. These are people who don't have it at all, who need it in order to just to function in the day of life, even those who are of age to go to school. It is important that we reach those individuals and give them the same opportunities that everybody else has.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to create some space for Assemblymember Grayson, if you wanted to add a little bit more, and also George, if you want to tell us about Senator Gonzalez action on this.
Just really quick, and I think it's so very, very important that we assure there's equity in equity. And what I mean by that is we talk about access. Access is tremendous, that's great, but we also have to talk about cost of that access from the consumer, and then quality of that access. And that's why infrastructure is so important, but then oversight to follow up with that infrastructure, which is where I believe the speaker's working group can really come in to lay out the right policies, so that a provider can't just do a checkbox, check the checkbox or check the box on the list. Yeah, we provided access, but the access isn't adequate enough to do a telehealth session or to be able to do video for a classroom project. And so we not only have to make sure that there's access, but that there's policies in place to make sure that that access is quality or adequate for what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'll just make a really brief remark on SB4. So, I mean, we have a, equitable access in our bill, obviously, so the California Advanced Services Fund has multiple sub-accounts, right, which is, some of the great work that the Assembly members are doing too, deal with that. But, what SB4 really does is by reforming the California Advanced Services Fund, it raises the speed. So a lot of the times the inequity links directly back to low speeds of internet for upload and download, in some cases, places that have zero speed, right, because they have zero infrastructure in that area. So SB4 really raises the floor and the ceiling, for that matter, by making folks who are in areas of 25.3 for upload and download speed or lower eligible. So that's going to open it up to a lot of folks who have really obsolete internet or no internet at all, and they're prioritized in that. So folks who have none, they come first, those communities, and so on and so forth. And making a build out requirement when these grants are used to make sure that it is 100 download and 20 upload, which we've learned over the last year is what you need, roughly that or more, to operate on Zoom and other video conferencing services. So I think that's the approach that we're taking with equity, is making it all encompassing, but tying it back to speeds to make sure that there is that quality there, that we're not just providing as Mr. Grayson suggested. So yeah, thank you, and I think that's the equity approach with our bill.
Awesome, thank you for outlining that to us. So a little over a year ago, which is insane to me, when COVID initially first hit, there were hundreds of students in the Capitol. In fact, CSSA was having the California Higher Education Student Summit, hundreds of students having meetings with their legislators and staff. Many of these meetings had to be rescheduled during that day. And as we know, soon after, civil unrest gripped the nation, and many young people took to the streets in support of Black lives. Many of us felt powerless to the situation and found ways to utilize our voices in unique ways to attempt to influence policy and find our way to the seat at the table. Myself and co-host Demi, with the support of California Forward and Youth Leadership Institute, started a podcast during this time called PolicyWise to have young voices present in conversation with policy professionals such as yourself to have our voices heard. And this has gotten quite a few folks involved, but young people are interested in influencing policy and are interested in being involved in the process and getting involved in the community. However, oftentimes do not know how to do so, or are having a hard time finding opportunities, and sometimes have to create them on our own. In this digital environment, as I'm sure you all have experienced, advocacy looks a lot different than it used to. And it's not all legislative. And so this is for everybody here in this conversation. It's also through groups like CETF working to close the digital divide. How do you suggest young leaders get involved in this space? How do we make sure our voice is heard? As this is an issue that many of us are passionate about, but most of us have no idea what to do about it. Susan, would you mind starting us on this one?
Oh, thank you. Sure. It's so important to have young voices that represent the range of, youth in our policy making, in communicating what's going on. It's so easy for young people not to feel connected to the policy process, which impacts their lives daily. So for instance, there's a bill 1176 that's aimed at trying to make the internet more affordable, right? And you look at a lot of the offers that are out there now, and college students, who are low income are not eligible. They're not on the list. So if we were more connected throughout the policy process, that wouldn't have happened, right? And so I think it's so critical to find ways to get involved in the process, whether it's through local elections, whether it's through volunteering in somebody's district office, whether it's getting involved in any kind of community organization throughout, your community, right? There are lots of community organizations, from promotores groups that do all kind of action-oriented work to really alleviate poverty and to really try and help people in systematic ways, to groups that teach digital literacy. Probably most important is to have a seeking mind, to think that you can make a difference, right? Because then you'll be motivated to find the way that best suits you. I mean, there are just so many opportunities, but unless you feel like you can make a difference, then you won't be motivated. And so, I hope we hear some other ideas, and I'm always interested to hear how people began their own journey. Because even if you feel like there's not a seat at the table, you can create one, right? But you as young people have to want to make a difference. And sometimes that means pioneering a path where our youth hasn't been. Other times it's getting connected to other folks in your community. So clearly on digital equity, there are lots of opportunities to get involved at a policy level, whether it's at the local level, state level, or the federal level. And we're certainly happy to talk to anybody who wants to work with any of the groups we fund, across the state, or if anybody wants to brainstorm ideas. We have high school students who do internships with us. So it's never too early to start.
Those are great points. Anyone else have thoughts on this?
if I may, there is, and thank you for that great perspective, Susan. And I'll add a little different lens. You know, a person that is leading with no one following is simply a person taking a walk in the park. And really, if you want to lead, then make sure that you build a base. And it may not necessarily mean that you've got 100 people walking behind you physically, but you've gone out into the community and you've listened to what their needs are. And then you take their voices collectively and you bring them forward and unite them with other leaders that have done the same thing. And one can put 1,000 to flight, two can put 10,000. So the point is you magnify your voice by actually being an incredible listener. A leader is an incredible listener. And then you come and advocate. I can't tell you the number of times folks have come and advocated for a cause. And when the question's asked, well, how many people have you talked to in your community? Well, none, but this is a great idea. And this is what we need. Well, is it what we need or is it what you want? And so when you bring a collective voice of your community as a leader and you combine or add yourself with other leaders of the same cause, it makes it for a powerful narrative and message. And it resonates in the ears of representatives, which is exactly what we're supposed to be doing, is representing people that you're leading. So I guess build your base and unite.
There's not a lot I can add to what has already been said, other than, I think there's a strong mandate. There is, I want to use this. When you walk outside, sometimes you can smell rain, but you can't see it. It's not there. Well, I walk outside and I see change in the air. And I think the mantle has been placed on every young person. Each of you, the mantle is Dr. Martin Luther King said this. He says, well, I won't say the whole quote, but silence is a form of betrayal. There is not a time right now that we can be silent on the things that matter. When you look at mostly Blacks are dying. 21-year-old brother who I didn't know was shot and killed by police because the police officer thought that they lost. She was grabbing for a taser and not her revolver. She ended up killing this child. When you look at all the other injustice, there's no time to be silent. If so, you will be found guilty of being silent on the things that matter. So I think the call has already been sent out. You start by finding where you feel most compelled to be involved in. Everybody's not called to go out and demonstrate in a demonstration or a march and a rally. You may your calling may be sitting at a desk, writing editors, newspapers, expressing it. It may be you going to a Twitter handle and responding and calling people to follow you on something that has not been addressed or something that has been addressed. And you want to magnify it even and intensify the conversation through that. Everybody may not be called to do that. Your calling may be, helping some older person in your neighborhood who can't go to the store. There's a calling for everyone to do something. You just need to find your calling and then do it.
Mic drop. Abraham, I know you have some thoughts if you want to go ahead.
Well, it's hard following up my boss because, like you said, mic drop. I'm just going to comment from the perspective of someone who's probably old enough to be, the older brother of many of the folks that are here on the call. I'm a very recent graduate myself. I was actually involved in student government at, my CSU campus, CSU Sacramento. And so for me, the answer of, how do we get young people involved? How do you make sure your voice is heard? Is something that always takes different shapes and different forms. But like the member was saying, it really is a matter of finding your niche. But I think that the other thing to really say is show up more than anything else, because conversations happen on a daily basis. Our legislators that we have on the call, both of the honorable assembly members, and also George in representation of Senator Gonzalez, they're doing what they can to represent the community and to try and amplify the issues. And just like Assemblymember Grayson said, if you want to be a leader and not just be walking through the park, that entails you doing the legwork and figuring out what your community needs. And in my mind, a lot of times as young people, you know, as younger folks, as millennials and zillennials, you know, we have thoughts on how the world should and shouldn't be operating. But for us, it's a matter of, you know, how do you carve a role? How do you find that niche? And the main thing is that you may not have all the knowledge that you're going to have in the future, but you gotta start from somewhere. And so showing up and getting connected and getting plugged in and getting involved in the needs and the issues of your community and talking with your local leaders, you know, I know that there's a lot of times where our generation sometimes feels that these institutions aren't as responsive as they could be. But as Assemblymember Gipson and Assemblymember Grayson are doing, you know, and as George is here on behalf of Senator Gonzalez, our legislators are happy to listen to the youth, are happy to listen to these folks. Yes. It's just a matter of engaging with them. And you have to start somewhere. And that starting somewhere means that if you see something and that something is affecting you, whether it's broadband access or racial justice or any of these other issues, it's up to us to stand up and show out and really try and advance this issue, because if you're not at the table for the conversation, you're on the menu, you know? And so that's something that's been said before. And for us, it's, if you want policy that reflects your needs, get involved in the policy-making process.
Thank you all for your extremely thoughtful responses. I feel different type of energy now. So I'm actually Lawson, if you wouldn't mind asking us questions from the audience.
Absolutely. So we do have one question from the audience currently for Susan. So Susan, is there any data for the North Coast and Sonoma North? Do you know anything about this?
So our survey is a statewide survey with the regions. And so not every specific community is able to have separate data in our survey. It's just the amount of cost involved in being able to have enough results from every community is, you know, just beyond what we can do. But if you are familiar with the American Community Survey, you can probably break out more the North Coast. And I'll put a link in the chat where I think you can find some more data on that community level than the regional level as our survey represents. So I hope that helps you.
Yes, Susan, that was extremely helpful. Thank you so much. We do have another follow-up question here from the audience for George. George, do you have any thoughts and others potentially as well on AB 14, which is designed as a companion bill to SB 4?
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing I could say is that Senator Gonzalez and Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry have been working very closely and been in normal conversations with each other, you know, weekly, if not every couple of weeks, to discuss, you know, getting their bills to a place to where they're absolutely companions in print and, you know, can be advanced through the legislative process and signed together. You know, and both members are principal co-authors on one another, so very much working together. And, you know, we've enjoyed having weekly or at least every other weekly conversations with the Assembly member staff on how to make these bills, you know, work for everyone involved and make sure that we really get the funding that we need for the California Advanced Services Fund and, you know, help close the digital divide. So, you know, that's, I'd say it's a lot of good works going on, and, you know, we're just getting closer to the finish line. And also AB 14 is up today in the Assembly Communications and Conveyance Committee. So I believe that's on 1 or 1:30 p.m. today. So you look forward to watching that as well.
Thank you so much, George. I do actually have a follow-up question. How can people help support Assemblymember Gipson's bill? Is there anything that the general public can refer to aside from Ledge Info? Anyone care to comment on that?
Sure. One, if you want to get involved, if you are excited about this bill or interested in getting involved for your first time, then I would strongly suggest one, this bill is, April, do you know when it's set for a hearing?
It'll be set, not this hearing for the Communications and Conveyance Committee, but the following week. So I'm thinking of the date off the top of my head, but it should be not this week, but next week on Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe.
Yeah, Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. And we would ask you to call in. I would absolutely encourage you to call in with your strong aye vote in support of 1425. Members who are on this committee, they need to hear from wherever you live to say, hey, I'm Mike Gipson, I support AB 1425. Boom. or I want to come and testify, and and ask to see if you can come testify and say why this bill is important for you and how it's going to change the trajectory for your community or other communities, why this bill is absolutely necessary. You can also write letters of support. I would love for you to send me the letter of support so we can enter those letters of support and make sure committee members have those letters of support. We would certainly ask you to even call members of the committee. You can go to and find out who's on that committee and call those specific offices and say, I'm asking that member to please support Assembly Bill 1425, and this is who I am, and this is where I live. That goes a long way towards helping, supporting, and getting across the finish line, AB 1425. So I thank you very much. Whoever asked that question, I look for you to get involved in this fight.
Thank you immensely. And now I'll just go ahead and pass it along to Michael.
Thank you, Lawson. We have just a little bit more time, so if I can ask just a quick question, final question before we close out. The issue laid out in front of us today seems to have a lot of implications for the private sector. With currently, access is being only provided by the private sector, and really what's needed to happen is private investment into areas that need access. And what I'm seeing now is that we need more of a public-private partnership to provide the access to the most low income in regionally disinvested communities. We have a public need for vital resources, for a vital resource being the internet. We can't apply to college without it, let alone be successful in the classroom. You can't access telehealth, applications for critical services, the census in 2020, research voter information, the list goes on and on. Dire public need for a privately managed resource. How can we bridge the gap, and how can private sector partner with public sector to close the digital divide? And this is for anyone who has thoughts on the topic.
Well, I'll throw myself out there first, real quick. I think we could learn a lesson from a neighbor up north, statewide, that we have, and it's not necessarily in broadband, but it's in recycling. And they were having a real struggle with getting people to recycle. And it wasn't because people didn't want to recycle, it was because they didn't have access. And because we've learned that curbside recycling isn't really that effective, because we all know when you fill up one trash can, you just use the other one. So it's not really separating. And so what they did was they actually created a co-op of all the people that pour into their market items that are recyclable, and those folks were required by policy to join this co-op, and that co-op then assessed a fee to each one of those contributors to the market based on volume. And so I'm not saying this is the panacea or the answer for California for broadband or for internet access, but what I am saying is we have private service providers out there that are using our market to build a very strong business and a bottom line profit. And I think it would be good for, instead of it being the government or the public, us against them, the private, or vice versa, I think it ought to be a hand-in-hand partnership where if public, the government is going to step up and subsidize or invest in this utility, then we ought to have a partnership with those that are actually making money off the utility to also have that opportunity to invest as well as a partner. And so thinking along the lines of that symbiotic co-op relationship might be something worth considering.
I think that you have to have, I've always been a strong believer and an advocate for developing these private public partnerships. I think it's absolutely needed, because if you're able to do that, then you're able to, one, tear down these barriers a lot quicker. And then two, you're able to, one, I mean, the business community and the private sector should have an invested interest in with the public. And we look at broadband, you would think every company that's in California have access to broadband. They have access. So they would want to be able to communicate with people, especially in this day and age where we have this pandemic as part of our reality, is being able to reach people, whether it's job opportunities, whether it's interviews, and those kinds of things. So this warrants a very strong private public partnership to manifest itself in a real serious way. Because again, if you are a business and you want people to know about your products, you want to be able to reach those individuals through broadband. You want to reach them through the internet. You want to be able to send stuff. I mean, you know how many people, on Facebook and Instagram, how many commercials pop up in the whole 9 yards. It's having that ability to reach people who are not looking at the normal conventional way of communicating and advertising. So they need to go right where people are active, and that is social media, right? And the way you connect with social media, you have a broadband connection. And so I think it's in the best interest of private to develop relationships with the public so that we can marry the two and achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you everyone so much. I think we're at about time. I just wanted to come back around and I just wanted to say, personally, we are just very grateful to have you here with us today. Assemblymember Mike Gipson, Assemblymember Tim Grayson, George Soares from Senator Lena Gonzalez's office, Abraham Mendoza from Assemblymember Gipson's office, and also Susan Walter, Senior Vice President at the California Emergency Technology Fund. So thank you immensely for being here with us today. We really appreciated your time and being here with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care and be safe.